What if the most ambitious invasion in history was also the moment a dictator sealed his own doom? Picture Berlin, June 1941, a city humming with confidence, banners fluttering, generals gathered around a map. But in the shadows, a single order is about to shatter the illusion of invincibility. On June 22, 1941, Hitler unleashes Operation Barbarossa, breaking his pact with Stalin and launching the largest invasion the world has ever seen. 3 million men, thousands of tanks, and a plan to conquer the East in a matter of weeks. But behind the headlines, the seeds of disaster are already sown. Secret meetings, brutal calculations, and fatal misjudgments will turn this gamble into a catastrophe. What if the road to Berlin's ruin began not on the beaches of Normandy, but on the frozen fields of Russia? What if the day Hitler turned on Stalin was the day he signed his own death warrant? Coming up, the day Hitler gambled everything and lost the world. But to understand why this invasion was so catastrophic, we have to go back 2 years. Why did Hitler turn on Stalin in the first place? And how did this single decision doom the Third Reich? Step into a smoky Kremlin office, August 1939. Two men, Molotov and Ribbentrop, shake hands over a map of Eastern Europe. Stalin and Hitler, sworn enemies by ideology, become partners in a deal that stuns the world, the Nazi-Soviet Pact. It was a non-aggression agreement, but it had a secret, darker side. In a hidden protocol, they carved up Poland, the Baltics, and Finland. Spheres of influence were drawn in pencil, but the consequences would be written in blood. On September 1st, 1939, Hitler invades Poland from the west. The world watches in horror. 16 days later, Soviet tanks roll in from the east, fulfilling their side of the secret bargain. Two dictators, once bitter foes, were now partners in dividing a continent. For nearly 2 years, this strange illusion of peace holds. Trains loaded with Soviet oil, grain, and raw materials roll west to fuel the Nazi war machine. In return, German engineers share vital technology with the Soviets. Diplomats toast to friendship, but trust was always a thin veneer. Why did Stalin trust Hitler's word? It's a question historians still debate. Some say he believed he could buy time, rebuild his army after the purges, and avoid a dreaded two-front war. Others argue he was blinded by wishful thinking, convinced Hitler wouldn't repeat Napoleon's mistake of invading Russia. He might have seen the pact as a way to let the capitalist powers of the West and the fascists in Germany destroy each other, leaving him to pick up the pieces. But beneath the surface, both sides were already preparing for betrayal. Soviet spies sent a stream of reports about German troop buildups on the border. Hitler's generals were deep into drawing up invasion plans. The world's most cynical alliance was a ticking time bomb about to explode. How did sworn enemies become partners in crime? And what did Stalin miss as he watched those trains roll west? Dawn breaks on June 22, 1941. The silence of the eastern frontier is shattered by a terrifying thunder. Tanks, artillery, and the roar of the Luftwaffe. Operation Barbarossa has begun. 3 million German soldiers surge across the border, smashing through unprepared Soviet defenses. Columns of panzers race toward Minsk, Smolensk, and Kiev. Villages burn. Prisoners march west in endless, heartbreaking lines. The world's largest invasion moves with terrifying speed. In Moscow, Stalin is stunned. For days, he refuses to believe the reports, convinced it's a provocation by rogue German generals, not an all-out war. His paralysis is disastrous. Soviet armies are encircled and destroyed by the hundreds of thousands. German officers celebrate, convinced that victory is only weeks away. Hitler himself declares that they only have to kick in the door and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down. But the Russian land is vast, and the summer is short. As the Wehrmacht pushes deeper, supply lines stretch dangerously thin. Soviet resistance, initially chaotic, hardens into a brutal, desperate fight. Stalin orders the infamous scorched earth policy, leaving nothing for the invaders but ashes and hunger. And then comes the rain. The autumn downpours, known as the Rasputitsa, turn the unpaved roads into rivers of mud. Tanks and trucks bog down. The blitzkrieg, the lightning war, grinds to a halt. By autumn, the German soldiers are exhausted, their summer uniforms no match for the coming cold, and then winter arrives. It comes early and with a vengeance. Temperatures plunge to -30, -40 degrees Celsius. Engines freeze solid. Weapons jam. Frostbite claims more men than bullets. The German army, unprepared for a winter campaign, is brought to its knees by an enemy they never put on their maps, General Winter. The Red Army, battered but unbroken, receives reinforcements from Siberia, troops accustomed to the cold. They launch a massive counterattack outside Moscow. The unstoppable German war machine is, for the first time, thrown back in a humiliating retreat. How did the world's largest invasion unravel so quickly? How could a plan that seemed so perfect on paper fail so spectacularly in reality? It's a story of overconfidence, logistical nightmares, and a catastrophic underestimation of the enemy. But the real defeat wasn't just on the battlefield. It was in the decisions made far from the front, in the mind of the dictator who started it all. Hitler's decision to invade the Soviet Union wasn't just a military blunder, it was a strategic catastrophe that opened a second front he could never win. It committed the bulk of his army to a war of attrition against a country with seemingly endless reserves of manpower and a ruthless will to survive. By attacking the USSR, he also inadvertently created a powerful alliance between the Western democracies and the Soviet communists, two groups that had every reason to distrust each other, now united by a common enemy. The resources poured into the Eastern Front were staggering. Men, tanks, planes, and fuel that could have been used to defend against an Allied invasion in the West were instead lost in the snows of Russia. The war in the East bled the Third Reich dry, turning it into a slow, agonizing defeat that spanned 4 brutal years. The invasion of Russia was not just another campaign. It was the beginning of the end. It was the moment Hitler's gamble failed, the point of no return. From the mud of Moscow to the rubble of Stalingrad, the road to the bunker in Berlin was paved with the fatal decisions made in the summer of 1941. The day he broke his pact with Stalin wasn't just an act of betrayal. It was the day he signed his own death warrant. The first winter of Barbarossa was only the beginning. Hitler, blinded by his early victories, refused to adapt. He split his armies, stretching them thin across 1,000 miles of hostile land. One thrust toward Leningrad, another toward the oil fields of the Caucasus, and a third toward the fateful city of Stalingrad. German generals pleaded for strategic retreats, for regrouping, for a dose of realism, but Hitler's orders from his distant headquarters were absolute. No step back, no surrender, no compromise. He micromanaged the war from afar, issuing commands that ignored the brutal realities of the Eastern Front, the mud, the freezing cold, and the enemy's growing strength. The Red Army, though battered, was learning. Soviet factories relocated east beyond the Ural Mountains began to churn out an endless stream of tanks and guns. Behind German lines, partisans sabotaged railways and supply convoys, turning the occupied territories into a quagmire. Civilians, enduring siege and starvation, found their will to resist only hardened by the suffering. Stalingrad became the crucible. It was a name that would echo through history as the graveyard of the German Sixth Army. Encircled, starved, and relentlessly bombarded, the once invincible soldiers surrendered in the bitter snow. In the north, Leningrad held out through a brutal years-long siege, a symbol of unbreakable resilience. The dream of a quick, decisive victory was dead, frozen in the Russian winter. So why did Hitler double down on disaster? How did pride and paranoia transform a potential victory into a catastrophic death spiral? The cost was staggering. Millions dead, entire armies shattered, and the myth of Nazi invincibility broken forever. But was Barbarossa just a German tragedy? Or was it a turning point for the entire world? To understand, we need to step back and look at the map of history. Think of Napoleon's Grand Army in 1812. They marched on Moscow with similar confidence, only to be swallowed by the same unforgiving combination of snow and starvation. Now, a century later, Hitler's panzer divisions raced east, fueled by the same arrogance, the same fatal blindness. Both dictators believed they could conquer Russia through sheer speed and willpower. Both fatally underestimated the vastness of the land, the severity of the weather, and the fierce resilience of a people defending their homeland. The pattern is hauntingly familiar. Victories in the summer sun, followed by utter disaster in the winter snow. Supply lines stretched to the breaking point, becoming thin threads of life that were easily cut. Allies faltered, morale collapsed, and the very land itself seemed to turn against the invader. Why do empires keep breaking themselves upon the Russian frontier? What crucial lesson, already taught by history, did Hitler so arrogantly ignore? The emotional echo is timeless. It's the story of pride before the fall, the unshakable certainty that this time it will be different, until the first snowflakes begin to fall and the triumphant advance turns into a desperate, chaotic rout. So, what does Operation Barbarossa really teach us? It's a stark warning, one etched into the frozen fields outside Moscow and the shattered streets of Stalingrad. It's a lesson about the astronomical cost of arrogance, of overreach, and of willfully ignoring the lessons of the past. Hitler's decision to turn on his supposed ally, Stalin, was more than a strategic betrayal. It was the moment he signed his own death warrant and sealed the fate of the Third Reich. Just 5 months after the invasion began, the dream of a quick victory was dead. Germany was now trapped in a grueling war of attrition on 2 fronts, a war it could never hope to win. Millions more would die, great cities would be reduced to ashes, and the world would be changed forever. The panic that gripped the German high command in the winter of 1941 feels disturbingly similar to the uncertainty faced by every empire that believed it could rewrite the rules of history and geography. Barbarossa stands as a monumental reminder. No leader, no matter how powerful or charismatic, can escape the consequences of their own hubris. Will the next empire fall for the same reasons? Will the next leader repeat the same catastrophic mistakes? The answers are hidden in the past, waiting to be found, if you only know where to look. Subscribe for more cinematic history and learn how the events of the past continue to shape the fate of nations today.